Hey there, welcome to The Last of Us, Surviving the Super Apocalypse. So this is an ebook that I wrote about the game The Last of Us, where the idea is that I played through the game without picking up any items, because it's just a weird way to approach the game, to kind of look at things in a different way, to rattle the mechanics a little bit. So the book focuses on the mechanical side and, of course, the story and plot side of the game. And then additionally, just whatever weird side tangents and rants I felt like going on at the time. So the book is available in full at keithcourage.com as an EPUB or a Mobi or whatever, a fucking text file if you're hardcore like that. Feel free to check it out, spread it around, do all that. This is the audiobook version. So I'm going to read this book with occasional additional sidebars, because that's just how I am. I can't seem to read this book without diverging constantly into my meta thoughts on what is already a very meta-style book. As a little quirk, I'm recording this book on a rocky, obscure beach out in nature. So if you hear nature sounds, that's what that is. Because, I just figured if I'm going to sit here and read a whole goddamn book, and it's a really long book. It's like absurdly long. I might as well do it somewhere beautiful that makes me happy, even if it compromises the sound quality somewhat. All right, so when we last left our heroes, we had just left Boston, and now we are speeding toward Pennsylvania? That's where Pittsburgh is, right? I'm Canadian. I have a hard time a little with the American states, and in fact, some of the Canadian provinces. But yeah, the cutscene where Joel and Ellie are driving along, one of the coolest cutscenes in the game. That is where we are currently. So, let's begin. Assalamu alaikum, people of goodwill. Sorry, that's a different thing. Comics and collectibles. Ellie swiped some periodicals from Bill's basement, and we're introduced to her love of comic books. If you collect all of the Savage Starlight books and read their summaries, they actually sound kind of exciting. I am not a big fan of collectibles in games. These comics, for instance, cause fairly frequent tonal problems. Even if Ellie is angry or distracted, she pops right back to her upbeat voice when her cool comic book dialogue kicks in. Collectibles definitely seem like a holdover from gaming's past. I don't mind the notes and the lore items, but the pure collectibles like the Firefly dog tags, I could not give a shit about. At least when Drake was picking up treasures, they were treasures. Picking up treasures is part of his job description. I'm clearly a pretty big fan of The Last of Us, but I cannot imagine going back to collect all the dog tags. I guess this also ties into the fact that I'm obviously not a fan of trophies either, because I guess that's the main reason why you would go back and get all the dog tags. Like, my friend and yours, Greg Miller, of Kinda Funny. Pretty delightful chap, but man, I wish he would shut up about trophies. Fucking trophies. I don't understand them at all. It's such busy work. It's such a waste of your life to get trophies. In fact, if I could erase trophies from video games... Oh, so I wanted to mention, I mentioned in an earlier part of this book about how the PS3 re-release of Shadow of the Colossus is the worst ever case of trophies, and the way that this ambiguous, epic moral quandary of a moment whenever you kill a Colossus, as it gets more and more weird and the implications start to build of like what is actually happening here, for a little trophy to pop up, I thought was like the most egregious use of trophies of all time. I just couldn't stand it. I'm like, I can't believe you guys did that. That is fucked up. Why are you ruining this beautiful classic art game? So the PS4 re-release is out, and they did the same fucking thing. And it occurred to me, all you would need to do to fix this problem is just don't have the trophy fire immediately upon killing the Colossus. Have the Colossus die, have the tendrils hit you, go back to wake up in the temple, have all the shadows stand around you. Then, finally, when you get control of your character back, then pop the trophy. Then there you go, you get your trophy and you're not just fucking taking a shit on the Mona Lisa. But I can see why they didn't do that, because trophies, this is what I don't respect about trophies and people that go out of their way to get trophies. It's just like slot machine nonsense. You're just getting that little like ding, 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 that little endorphin rush of, oh, I did a thing. Look at me, Mom. I did a jump off the diving board. I got a trophy. So of course you gotta hit that moment at the same time that you stab into a Colossus's brain, or you wouldn't get the same feeling, right? You wouldn't get your little hit. Well, fuck you. I'm saying it. If you're a big trophy hunter, you're a fucking idiot. You're a goddamn moron. You're just an idiot. You're just like those... You're just like the people that stay at a slot machine all day. It's nonsense, and someone has to tell you. Someone has to be clear about this and to stop putting up with your bullshit. Hold on, there's a train going by. Let's take a break. So, back to the dog tags. What are the lore implications of the Firefly dog tags? When a Firefly dies, does their friend throw their dog tag as hard as possible in a random direction? Ah, shit, that one got stuck in a tree. Ah, well, maybe a weird smuggler will get it down with a rock someday. Until then, rest in peace, brave Firefly. Head out on the highway. Not my best chapter title of all time. Calls to mind a song that I would prefer not to have in my head. So why did I do that to myself? I don't know. Surely there's a better highway-related song lyric I could have used. However, it's not coming to me. This reminds me of those days of like old EGMs and stuff where everything needed to have a really dumb title. We'll call it a tribute to those days. It's not just a terrible segment title, it's an homage. Ellie gets to the end of the comic and mentions that she hates cliffhangers. I like that the term cliffhanger has survived into the apocalypse. When was the last time a character was left literally hanging from a cliff? Sylvester Stallone's 1993 film Cliffhanger? Before tossing Bill's porn mag out the window, Ellie says, "Hold your horses." I wonder who taught her these antiquated sayings. I like them. I realized after moving away from the Canadian East Coast that I'd picked up a lot of antiquated phrases from my mom. Calling notebooks scribblers and snow pants leggins, shit like that. So keep it alive, Ellie. The old times were the good times. Not really, but it's a nice thing to say. I also like that even in the apocalypse, there's abandoned porn on the highway. It's a human tradition. As long as there is porn and there are highways, we will litter them with such until we are down to our last. Part of Ellie's thievery haul is a cassette tape. Joel puts it on and she discovers that it's country music. Well, better than nothing, she says. I could overanalyze every line of this game, but let's do just this one. Ellie says better than nothing dismissively, but not too dismissively. She wants to make it clear that country music is not her thing, but also that she doesn't really mind. And she's also staying polite enough not to offend Joel, who clearly loves country music. Damn, Ashley Johnson did a good job voicing Ellie. That's just good stuff. I promised I wouldn't talk about Uncharted 4 anymore until I got to the chapter about Uncharted 4, but that really was just real quick. That was the disappointment I felt with Uncharted 4. I mean, I've gone over it before, but it was a rushed thing. Druckmann took over midway through production, but the way literally every line in The Last of Us carries significance and weight, you can dig into it, you can find additional meaning. Whereas Uncharted 4 is the opposite. I feel like if you're looking for additional meaning from the dialogue in Uncharted 4, you have a very difficult search ahead of you. Everything is very surface. There's not a lot of underlying meaning. There's nothing to sink your teeth into. Which arguably maybe there wasn't in the early Uncharteds either, but that's not what the early Uncharteds were trying to do. That's why Uncharted 4 was such a goddamn drag to me. It's like it was trying to be a more mature Uncharted, but it was a wafer thin. The drive into Pittsburgh is one of my favorite scenes. The game jump cuts from Ellie awake to Ellie sleeping in the rain, then to the next day. As they enter the city, you can see reflections on the window while Ellie looks up at the old brownstones. It's nice and kind of comforting, like a family trip. However, the actual reason for going into Pittsburgh is pretty contrived. A hunter walks into the road. A hunter, by the way, is The Last of Us's catch-all term for a violent raider. Seeing this guy, Joel knows something bad is about to happen. Like, way totally. Fully totally. Why he didn't back up, I have no idea. Maybe the next closest off-ramp was 800 miles back? Maybe he wanted to beat rush hour traffic? Who can say? Joel is a pretty taciturn man. He makes decisions and he sticks by them, no matter how many hours of fighting through crazed, scavenging murderers those decisions might cause. Don't ask him to explain. Do not. Hey Joel, why'd we drive into that ambush? Ellie, you are treading on some mighty thin ice. You can't just say that every day about every decision that you make. The ice is getting thinner, girlie. So thin. Razor thin. Don't break the ice, Ellie. Why not? What happens? No one knows. 'Cause no one breaks it. No one dares. And I assume the conversation will go on as such. Pittsburgh ambush. So a guy limps into the street, and Joel knows it's an ambush. And with a rebel yell, Joel cries, "Yes, please ambush me," and puts the pedal to the metal. In a somewhat unlikely spot, the ambushers push a truck down a hill, which smashes into Joel's truck. Joel crashes, and this begins a clusterfuck which will not be resolved for an entire season. A bunch of grizzled dickbags set upon our heroes. I love the look on that one crazy old bastard's face as he holds Joel's neck over some broken glass. It always sticks in my mind. That is one crazy looking fuck. Speaking of crazy fucks, you have to kill so many goddamn guys during this fight. Even more so than missing having guns, I really miss having bricks. Sometimes Ellie throws a brick at someone so I can still get an occasional brick punch combo. She's a crack fucking shot with those bricks, the same as Joel. It's weird how Joel throws a dart later on and totally sucks at it, because if it were a brick, he would hit the bullseye every time. I can tell this fight is going to be a long one, but I did get my full health bar back, so that's nice. Ice Climber. Holy Lord, what was I thinking? I'll write a book about a video game, I said. It'll be much more fun than trying to write a regular book. I'll tell you what I've learned so far. Writing a book is writing a book. It doesn't matter what it's about, it's still a damn book. I've been working on this for ages, and I'm only at Pittsburgh. The Last of Us has been re-released for PlayStation 4. There's a new grounded difficulty that I haven't tried, and I'm still writing. It's mental. Why do people write whole books about video games? Who started this trend? It's crazy. If this isn't a sign of a pre-societal collapse collective madness, then I don't know what the hell is. Hey, there's no more gas, and people are eating each other's faces for nourishment. What skills can you bring to our ramshackle tribe? I wrote a whole book about Ice Climber. You don't say. Well, listen, friend. Don't take this too hard, but we're gonna eat your goddamn face. You're a worthless piece of trash person. How long was this book about Ice Climber? 1,200 pages. 1,200? About Ice Climber? Well, I had to describe all the enemies and the different kinds of blocks, and it also had a lot of pointless divergences. And at this point, our protagonist's speech would become muffled because of his face being eaten off. This was one idea I had for this book. I just thought it'd be funny to have an index at the back, I never figured out how to do that. I never figured out index making technology. But I decided it'd be funny to mention Ice Climber for no reason, just so in the in the index it could say ice climber, page whatever. Stealth drums. One really cool aspect of The Last of Us' stealth system are the warning drums. I didn't notice them on my first playthrough, being all caught up in the listening system as I was. Looking back, it's amazing how integral the listening system used to seem. The more I play listen free, the more I'm able to deduce the actual rules of stealth. Stealth in The Last of Us doesn't quite conform to reality, as no video game does. Enemies have no peripheral vision, nor can they hear their friend gurgling desperately for breath directly behind them. If you're hidden behind an open-backed shelf with nothing on it, no problem. The enemies are very polite, and like playing hide-and-seek with a toddler, they won't admit that they've seen you. So you've got to internalize these game rules, and without the visual cues given by listen mode, it can be easy to Get the fuck. Man, this one huge train went by earlier and it left, and I'm like, oh, thank God, because it trapped me. I was like locked down here. And now another huge train is coming. You better fuck off, train. You better go right by. The train did, in fact, blast right by, so I can only assume that my yelling at it worked perfectly. So stealth. You've got to internalize these game rules, and without the visual cues given by listen mode, it can be easy to stumble into a dangerous bludgeoning. But as long as you're at least trying to be sneaky, The Last of Us will usually meet you halfway. One of my favorite aspects of the stealth system is that you'll get an audio warning before everything goes to shit. It comes in the form of some gentle timpani drums. They start as a quiet rumble, letting you know that you're straying towards someone's line of sight. Then the volume grows until BAM! Some post-apocalypse dickhead is shooting you in the taint. There are times when it seems like an enemy should definitely be able to see you, but the drums haven't had a chance to hit their climax yet. You still have a moment to move out of their line of sight, and it's nice of the game to fudge things a bit. If you're running around like a post-apocalyptic crazy man, you'll of course get spotted right away. But if you make the effort to creep around, The Last of Us will respect the drums. It's a really neat system that I think a lot of people missed. The peculiar blindness of the enemies is somewhat explained by having them look from side to side as part of their animation cycle. So while the game is gifting you with these additional moments of unrealistic stealth, there's a chance the enemy will actually be looking the other way. When the animations line up that way, it's a cool moment, and it totally works. Other times, the enemies will be looking right at you and still not notice shit. But hey, no game can read your mind. Vectrex games could, but those are pretty tough to find these days. I don't think fully realistic stealth games will ever exist, because in life stealth barely exists. Fully realistic stealth games would be called getting shot immediately games. And I'm guessing that those probably wouldn't catch on, unless virtual reality spawns a breed of players who love getting killed, which it probably will. You're playing it wrong. This fight is going to take a while, so let's keep blabbing about stealth. Another semi-common complaint about The Last of Us is that playing in a purely stealthy fashion is nigh impossible, and that's true. The Last of Us is designed for stealth to fail, and for combat situations to get crazy. You want to get nuts? Let's get nuts! That's why it's so easy to functionally reset the enemies. You're meant to get caught, and the excitement comes from trying to think your way out of that bad situation. Then you can battle everyone to the death or run away and try again. You know, I bet if we could translate these birds, they'd be saying, "Who are you? Go away. Why are you here?" Sorry, birds, I got work to do. I never had a problem with the sometimes finicky stealth of The Last of Us, because I gave up the idea of perfect stealth long ago. I realized that what's fun about stealth games is not playing them perfectly. What's fun is getting caught. Dishonored. Dishonored is a great example of how adhering to stealth can hurt an experience. There seem to be a lot of Dishonored players who reloaded every time they got spotted, and I would argue that those people really haven't played the game. Granted, it's partially Dishonored's fault for rewarding an ultra-stealthy run with a good ending. Quote-unquote good. But spoiler alert, both endings are lame. That storyline sucked a million tits. You can just watch the endings on YouTube if you really wanna. A dumb little movie is no reason to ruin an experience for oneself. I like making up my own rules while playing video games, obviously, and Dishonored is great for that. If you feel like dusting off your copy of Dishonored, here is a great idea to try. I heard that initially, the blink ability was not given automatically to the player. Hence, each level was designed so that it could be completed without using blink. I decided to crank up the difficulty, rely only on the autosave, and to never use magic. I bought the physical upgrades, but I stopped there. Man, that is some hard shit. I made it about 3/4 of the way through the game, and those were my best Dishonored adventures, hands down. I ended up playing some sections over and over. The brothel level in particular sticks in my mind. But getting caught by a guard, rushing through the streets, clambering onto a canopy, and diving through an open window, that shit is fucking choice. It reminded me a lot of Mirror's Edge, except, fun. I recommend it. It was a lot more fun than, for example, playing through The Last of Us without picking up any items, which, speaking of, let's get back to that. This is where this book is definitely beginning to show its age, with my references to Dishonored and Mirror's Edge, and no reference whatsoever to the fact that there is a sequel to both games, which by the time this audio version comes out, those are also antiquated. But in a way, I feel like this book, it's kind of, it's sort of trapped in amber a little bit. It is the video game landscape circa 2013, 2014, around the time of The Last of Us, No need to keep everything up to date and updated because The Last of Us is of that era. This is a really hard fight. See, sometimes I didn't go for the clever section title. Sometimes I did the opposite of that. One of the brutal but impressive things about fights in The Last of Us is that they never play out the same way. You can memorize the types of enemies and how many there are, but from there, the situation scatters fast. And it reminds me of, I think I even mentioned it somewhere else in this book, but the time that I dug up an old N64 and I was like, you know what, I'm going to beat Perfect Dark on the hardest difficulty. And I never quite did it, but yeah, you could memorize Perfect Dark like crazy and you kind of had to at that difficulty. It's like, all right, this guy's going to be here. If I move this way, he'll hop that way, and then I'll do this. And it became this weird, I would say chess game, but not chess game. It's like if there was only one move. I guess it's like one of those chess puzzles of there's only one way out of this. How do you get through? Still fun in a weird way, but after 3 weeks of that, I was like, what am I doing, man? You can't spend 6 hours on one level of Perfect Dark. This is not a good use of anyone's life, even mine. This fight, back to the book, this fight in particular starts out very bottlenecked. Joel is trapped in the back of a garage, and it can take ages for the enemies to spread out naturally. So I start letting enemies see me on purpose, just to get them moving a bit. Everything can be going great, but then some guy will jump you from behind. Even after playing through this game a bunch of times, I'm still genuinely surprised by some of the stuff these guys do. Man, I don't know why I always think that my stupidest side is hey, this is a thing I'll add in for the audiobook. Why do I never trust the book? Why do I not presume that my past self thought the same thing? Because this next section is called Memorizing Perfect Dark. I'm really dumb, I don't know. It's like my brain always goes through the same little pathways and the same oh, this thought makes me think of that. And then I just totally forget. That's whatever. Let's just sally forth, shall we? Memorizing Perfect Dark. Really? I'm writing about Perfect Dark now? I sure am! So, the Perfect Dark story. In 2006, I was living in Vancouver, and I was having a depressing goddamn month. I broke up with my first serious girlfriend and was going through withdrawal at a junkie-like level. I quit my job and basically stayed inside all the time. Staying inside wasn't such a bad call because it was also the darkest month on record in decades. Vancouver gets into these jags where there is no measurable level of sunshine, which means that the sunlight is so diffused by cloud cover that nothing casts a shadow. That month, there was no measurable level of sunshine for something like 27 days. It was crazy and more than a little depressing. Luckily, I was prepared. I had assembled a full Nintendo 64 from pieces I'd found at various thrift stores. The only thing I had to buy at full price was the RAM pack, which turned out to cost more than the rest of the pieces combined. Man, it was like a golden age of thrift stores back in the mid-2000s. Like, people didn't quite know what things were worth, or they didn't look them up. Maybe the internet just wasn't as robust back then. eBay and shit was around then, right? Or it was just starting? I don't know. But I remember one time, it was like the greatest thing I ever found at a thrift store. It was a full Nintendo Entertainment System. It wasn't in the cardboard box, but it was like the styrofoam part of the box. It was a Nintendo, 2 controllers, Mario 1, 2, and 3 for $15. And I was like, you couldn't have fucked up worse. This is crazy. And it was all in immaculate condition. It was perfect. And I just know it was like some kid who went off to college or something and his mom donated this thing. And I could just imagine when he came home and looked in his closet and his perfectly arranged Nintendo was gone. He must have been wicked pissed. And $15. Wow. Just absolutely crazy. Like, those days just don't happen anymore. People look things up, or they have some sense that video games are big money items, are worth money. Because then there was also a flea market at that time that you could tell the people who ran the flea market totally looked up everything. Because any time I found a game that I'm like, oh, cool, that game, it was always like $60. You know, it was priced at what it was worth. And it's like, son of a bitch, you figured out about the internet. But yeah, I brought that Nintendo when I moved to New York in 2008, 2009. And I left it, just left it with my old roommates when I left. I'm like, here you go, guys, have a Nintendo. And when I came back to visit, a year later, somehow the Nintendo had gone missing or somebody, who knows where it was. But I'm like, hey, you know what? Who gives a shit? It was $15 and I left it anyway. I abandoned it anyway. But yeah, to this day, holy shit, like the best deal I've ever found, ever. That was funny too when I first got that Nintendo, that the girl I was dating at the time, I remember she didn't grow up with video games. And the fact that I played Super Mario by holding down the run button the whole time, that's just natural to us. That's what you do. I mean, you got to get moving. It's just fucking Mario. It's like, let's move along. Let's get this going. That very notion surprised her. She's like, dude, how do you just hold down the run button? How are you running the whole time? And I'm like, how are you not? What? Because I just honestly never knew people who didn't grow up with video games. So I was surprised to see how the other side lives. Because I was thinking that the other day too, about how I had a Sega Master System before a Nintendo. And like the two versions of nostalgia. I mean, I still have a lot of Nintendo nostalgia, and that's pretty cool. But that's the nostalgia every kid in the 80s has. Like, we all have that common nostalgia. Where the Sega Master System nostalgia, it's a lot more common in like England and Brazil. Not in North America, but in my neighborhood. If you gathered up all those kids that I hung out with when I was young, we all have Sega Master System nostalgia, and that's so cool, like that little bubble, I'm glad I got both. I think it's valuable to have your own little pockets of nostalgia that aren't just the nationwide nostalgia. Anyway, let's get off that digression so we can get back to the digression that's in the book. I was a huge GoldenEye 007 fan, and had even mastered the dual stick controls, which involved holding one controller in each hand. But I'd missed Perfect Dark when it originally came out. Finally, I could play it. Turns out Perfect Dark is not as good as GoldenEye, but it's not too bad. So I stayed inside and played Perfect Dark on the highest difficulty over and over. My brain was not in the mood to participate in real life, and Perfect Dark was my enabler. At that difficulty, every level had to be meticulously memorized. Enemies in Perfect Dark would always react in a predictable way, so a level that started out being nearly impossible would eventually become a flawless ballet, with every maneuver executed perfectly. There were no AI surprises, such as there are in The Last of Us. I was about 3 weeks deep into this process before I admitted how much time I was wasting. But it's interesting to look back at that time and to see how I reacted. When my brain was really hurting, this is how I looked after myself. I started seeking out pieces to an old video game system, and then played it into the ground. That's how I kept my mind off the situation, and, presumably, slowly healed. Growing up in the 80s, it was somehow a given that video games were bad for kids. As I got older, I would sometimes hear good stories about gaming, such as how doctors who played video games were better at performing macroscopic surgeries. Stories like that always felt like a bit of a vindication. You know, I would move away from this ludicrously bird-filled area, but there's this one little alcove on this beach that's less windy, and it's a bit of a breezy day, so I'm afraid it's just me and the birds for a little bit. But it's memories like my depressing times in Vancouver that really convince me video games are important. On the surface, games can seem like a waste of time. And if you knew me in life, you might think I don't even like video games, the amount of complaining I do about them. But video games are important. They've been a through line throughout my entire life, and when the chips are really down, they help me feel reconnected to how I was when I was young. Aw. When you've just got to get out of your own head and let time heal your wounds, nothing works better than a video game. Enemy AI. I've been trying to address different criticisms of The Last of Us that I've seen online. One of those is that some folk don't like the enemy AI. Apparently, the enemies don't behave quite like they did in pre-release footage. I'll have to take their word for it, since I only ever gave the trailers a quick once-over. The fact that Naughty Dog was making a new game was enough pre-release information for me. Frankly, we've reached a point where if you buy into the pre-release vision of how a game will be, then shame on you. It's probably better to avoid the promotional material as much as possible. Part of why I didn't delve into the Last of Us trailers was because the BioShock Infinite hype let me down so hard. It's way more fun to go into a game mostly blind, rather than saddled with a lot of expectations. I do wonder that sometimes. I mean, I really think BioShock Infinite is fundamentally flawed, just the way it's constructed, how the gameplay and the storytelling completely do not mesh, which is my favorite thing about BioShock and BioShock 2, is the way that the storytelling and gameplay reinforce one another. BioShock Infinite just shits all over that. It doesn't give a fuck, and I didn't enjoy that. But I bet I would have liked that game better if I didn't have years worth of hype and some truly amazing trailers. Some of those early BioShock Infinite, I mean, I guess they were just proof of concept videos, because they weren't even remotely what the game was like. But man, some of those were great. I still want to play that game, you know? That being said, I'm really not sure what online wags expected out of The Last of Us's enemy AI. I think it's fucking sweet. Once again, I'm going to put some blame on playing the game on normal difficulty. If you're able to do a bunch of weird, unrealistic things without getting killed, of course the enemy AI is going to seem spotty. They're trying to react to an unpredictable and nigh unstoppable Superman. I can't stress enough how much you fucked up if you played The Last of Us on normal. I will also cast aspersions on your manliness and your femininity to boot. This hunter attack in Pittsburgh is the first major encounter with human enemies, and they seem a lot more realistic to me than most video game enemies do. Granted, they are cautious to a fault, allowing the player to easily reset the situation after being spotted. But that's clearly a deliberate design decision, and is fairly easy to swallow. These guys could be killed at any moment, so it's understandable that they might be a little tender-footed. I actually think that a lack of bravado is one of the more realistic traits an enemy can possess. The baseline, set by games like Wolfenstein and Doom, was a non-stop assault by enemies. Since then, the evolution of combat AI has basically involved having enemies do anything besides that. The way the hunters communicate with each other particularly impresses me. It's probably just window dressing, which has no actual effect on their behavior, but it often feels real. Aimless and repetitive enemy banter is a huge sticking point for me, and will often cause me to mute a game altogether. But The Last of Us's enemy communication rarely seems to hit a bum note. I do think the sense of realism in The Last of Us's combat is aided by the game's high level of violence. There is no way to relate to these people besides fighting them, but that relationship is very well represented. There's a visceral feeling to the combat. It's close and intimate and super fucked up feeling, kinda like a real fight. I broke a heavy vase over my brother's head once, and he'd probably agree that it was a lot like when Joel smashes a brick over someone's head. Or he would if he was speaking to me. Families, man, what can you do? Not hit people with vases, I guess? Sometimes the answer is right in front of you. Wouldn't it be weird if a therapist advised me to write this book? Just write 10 zillion words on your favorite video game. Everything will come out eventually. That'd probably be a pretty bad therapist. And if you're playing the Super Apocalypse drinking game, you now have to finish your drink, as I mention once again that I don't have an editor. So is that all I got on enemy AI? I guess so. So let's discuss strangling. Slow strangle. I'll tell you one thing. Nathan Drake breaks necks 1,000,000 times faster than Joel does. It feels strange going back to Uncharted. Drake could flip a coin and kill 2 guys before it lands, whereas Joel really settles in for a nice, long strangle. Is that all I got on strangling? All right, back to the actual battle. This fight will never end. This first wave of enemies is taking a fuckload of tries to get past. I keep trying over and over and over, but I just saw something new. I was trying to hop over a dumpster while a bad guy was right behind me, and he grabbed my ankles and pulled me down. I've never seen that before. That was pretty cool. I was confused by how sometimes this fight would checkpoint me at the halfway point, but most of the time would reset me to the very beginning of the fight. Eventually, I will realize that it's because I was choosing to manually restart the encounter, rather than letting myself die. The manual reset takes you back to the very start. So this fight ended up being a little more work than it needed to be. Sometimes, when enemies notice you, they literally stumble back slightly. They're so fucking surprised to see the guy that they were intently looking for that they can't even maintain their balance. That's a little weird. Playing by a game's rules. One description of Dark Souls that I always liked is that it's a game that will bend to you, but won't bend for you. If you learn the systems and play by the rules, you can kick that game's ass. But if you're unmindful of the game's systems and are just blindly doing your own thing, then you're fucking dead. Dark Souls is basically a hard difficulty that you can't turn off. When other games are set to higher difficulties, they behave similarly. A player needs to learn the rules because a haphazard playstyle will lead to a quick death. When I first played Uncharted 2 on crushing difficulty, it seemed impossible. I thought I'd never be able to beat it, and spent a little while blaming the game for being unreasonably crushing. But in fact, despite having already beaten Uncharted 2 on hard, I had not really learned the game's rules. Crushing difficulty forces a player to seek out the very edges of the simulation, and to learn exactly what they can and cannot do. In Uncharted 2's case, what I eventually learned is that it rewards swashbuckling. The game is trying to emulate an adventure movie, and its systems will bend to that end. Firing short bursts blindly from cover, or spraying bullets while running, are far more effective than they should be. If you're rolling, or leaping over things, or moving constantly between different types of cover, bullets will magically miss you. The game is trying to teach you, through the medium of your own death, that you shouldn't sit still. You shouldn't take careful aim while turtling somewhere. You're supposed to be Indiana Jones. So fucking be Indiana Jones. The Last of Us has a very different set of rules. Where Nathan Drake can run straight toward a gun-toting enemy and bust them in the chops, grabbing their gun smartly out of midair, Joel will get killed for trying to do the same. Instead of fudging the system to help you survive like Uncharted would, The Last of Us will fudge the system so that you die, very suddenly and harshly. It's crystal clear about the fact that you should never, ever run at an armed opponent, and it isn't kidding. Even an enemy in the midst of one of those backward shock stumbles will immediately recover and immediately shoot Joel in the throat. I think that's a great example of how gameplay can help to tell a game's story. Uncharted is about swashbuckling, and The Last of Us is about strategy. Unless you have a winning lottery ticket made out of 4-leaf clovers, swashbuckling is not in Joel's best interest. 1 hour of fighting. Holy fuck. Like the museum fight, this Pittsburgh battle almost made the wheels fall off of my itemless playthrough idea. I almost finished the battle on the very first try, but then things went bad. I had to try over and over for an hour. I finally put on a podcast just to give myself something else to focus on. It's tougher not being able to hear the game audio, but the podcast helped change my internal unit of measurement. Instead of, I've reset this fight dozens of times, it became, I've been retrying this fight for one podcast. That doesn't sound nearly as bad. In the end, one bad guy gets 2 solid hits on me with a big piece of wood, and I lose 1 point of health. But I make it through, and that's good enough. Seeing all the bottles lying around the battlefield and thinking of the bullets sitting in my inventory, I was almost salivating with a desire to shoot some of these assholes or to break bottles over their garbagey heads. The thing is, this game is supposed to feel dirty. It's supposed to feel like a scramble. Every fight is supposed to push you up against the wall. You're not supposed to get through fights without getting hurt, and certainly not without using weapons. It's becoming obvious that this playstyle is starting to butt up against reality. I'm pushing the game's systems into some fairly audacious places. I've made it this far basically unscathed, but I think that goal is becoming unrealistic. From now on, taking a little damage during fights will officially become okay. I'm not going to retry a fight just because I took a punch, but I'm still going to try to limit the damage per fight to 1 health bar. If some guy manages to put a bullet in me, that's a restart for sure. Heading deeper into the pit. This whole Pittsburgh section is pretty suspect. Setting up a bus to T-bone tourists would be really difficult. Do they reset it every time? It seems pretty dang immobile. So much so that we can't get past it. Go under it? No room. Through it? It's got like magic windows or something. Around it? That's perfectly wedged into the alley, I'm afraid. So there's no heading back the way we came. Gotta go deeper into Pittsburgh. I'm not saying I have a better idea as to how to push the game forward. I'm just saying that this setup does not conform to reality. But fuck it. I don't want to go back anyway. So Joel pries open a garage door and he and Ellie head through. Back in Billstown, we had passed a pile of burned infected. Joel told Ellie not to look, but she said she's seen worse. Here, there are a bunch of human bodies. Way more gnarly. But I guess it's all relative. Ellie's already seen Joel smash a bunch of people's heads in, which is even worse still. That's definitely a narrative corner that action games get trapped in. No matter how well told and how well integrated the story, the basic gameplay is always far more terrible and violent than anything the narrative can throw your way. On the wall is a manifest written by the Hunter group. It says that 3 small groups traveled through here in the past 3 days. That seems like a fair amount of traffic. Though they weren't all necessarily people coming into town. Maybe some of them were locals that the Hunters tracked down? This brings me back to the elaborate design of the Hunters' ambush. Is ambushing people who are in cars the norm? The manifest doesn't mention finding any working cars. The whole Pittsburgh setup is definitely a touch more fuzzy and contrived than most of the setups in this game. Not that I'm complaining, just noticing. Joel tells Ellie a bit about how the Hunters work, and that he knows this because he used to take part in similar ambushes. How many people have you killed? Ellie asks. Joel doesn't answer. Ellie says, I'll take it that means a lot. Take it however you want. It's a pretty big reveal that goes by quickly because Ellie doesn't have enough power in the relationship to push any questioning. But the fact that Joel was a hunter is a key point to his character, and a key point toward explaining his later behavior. You know what I'm talking about, right? Doctor, doctor, bang, bang, dead, dead. Hunter Joel. It's not surprising that Joel has killed a lot of people. Ellie just saw him kill 10 people in the past few minutes. But that was in self-defense. Being a hunter is about openly preying on the innocent. To join with the Hunters and to murder and rob anyone you can find, that's a level of moral bankruptcy beyond what we've seen from Joel. But it's not surprising. Even something as awful as joining the Hunters seems fairly justifiable after an apocalypse. For the world to have changed so severely, in a way that no one could have seriously entertained until it actually happened, it must have felt unreal. Like walking through a dream with the old way of life completely gone. That sense of unreality would make it much easier to discard the old rules. If everyone in the world is trying to kill you, it makes sense to join a gang and to kill them motherfuckers preemptively. Being evil would be better than being powerless. They say the best villains are justified in their own minds, but villains rarely actually pan out that way. Sure, the Joker feels justified in poisoning a water supply so that everyone dies wearing a giant grin. He feels that way because he's fucking crazy. That doesn't mean it's a justifiable way to act. Joel, on the other hand, really is one of those villains. Joel is a bad dude, but the path that led him to that state is easy to see, and is basically justifiable. If we were in his shoes, most of us would have followed that same path. If we didn't, we'd be dead. There are no atheists in a foxhole, and there are no altruists in an apocalypse. Deep, right? Getting deep. Getting fucking deep up in here. Fuck. Whoa. Sorry, I'm like balancing on rocks. I don't know why. I just fell off. Female hunters. There are no female hunters in The Last of Us, which is something I saw brought up many times online. Seems like a bit of an odd place to call for gender equality. Hey, women can be amoral murderers just as much as men can. My sister is a murderer. Where's her representation? The lack of female hunters does not strike me as particularly odd. In a society as brutal as the Hunters, it's easy to imagine that they'd have a no women and no kids mentality while assembling their raiding parties. Henry mentions that they don't tolerate having kids around at all. Basically, the Pittsburgh hunters are fucking psycho. So I'm okay with all these hunters being men. If that makes me sexist, then curse these fingers! Curse them in their misguided ways! Forgive them, for they know not what they type! And let the record show that my mom thinks I'm cool. So God bless. That being said, it would have been neat to include some female hunters. From what I've read about primal societies, many had surprisingly progressive ideals. Men who were more inclined toward domestic pursuits were happily accepted into female roles within the tribe. It would then stand to reason that women would also be accepted into what are traditionally considered more male roles, should murder be what they were more interested in. The actual reason for a lack of female hunters, according to an interview with Neil Druckmann, is strictly due to the memory budget on the PS3. Both genders would have been represented if the system could have supported it. But I think the all-male raiding parties work. This is not a society that has had time to develop. It's still bringing short-sighted blight to whoever crosses its path. So it seems believable that only men would populate the hunter gangs, while women would fulfill different roles back at base camp. Call them insecure. They are wantonly murdering everyone they meet, after all. In life, I believe that all genders should be treated equally. In art, I do think that treating women and men identically is somewhat artistically suspect. Making half of your murderers female is, in a certain light, a step toward equality, but it definitely lacks nuance. Really, having any hard and fast rule is never going to garner the best result, as well-meaning as that rule may be. The next segment is titled Gender. I don't even remember what I wrote here, but let me just take a quick break, because at the time of recording this, The Last of Us Part 2 has not been released, but they did put out a couple of promo videos, and there was this one that was like some kind of tribal camp where this lady gets held down and gets her arm broken with a hammer. I didn't even realize it was The Last of Us. I was just watching it out of the corner of my eye. And I remember kind of laughing. I'm like, Jesus, this is a little much. Why is this so brutal? And then it's like The Last of Us Part 2. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay, sure, I guess. But I didn't think twice about the gender component of this video at all. And then I started hearing the news stories of like, is it okay for Naughty Dog to have such violence occur toward women? And it's like, what? What? Like, you want more representation for female characters. That trailer was like all female characters. It was super weighted toward female characters, but now they're not allowed to be hurt? Like, fuck off. You know? Have a fucking point, man. Don't just like always be against whatever's happening. Oh, this is a problem and that's a problem. It's like, are you kidding? Do you want equality or not? That's just so ludicrous. And it's also a good example of why, in general, internet stories, internet trends, whatever, should really just be ignored, because like we approach them as though they're coming from one singular place. Like, oh, the internet said this, but then the internet said that, and these two things contradict and they don't relate. But the reality with anything, any fucking internet blow up, any little whatever, is it's all just coming from little singular enclaves. It's all coming from little individual places that of course contradict and of course don't have a unified view. And that's never going to change. It's just, of course, it's different groups with different opinions. What needs to change is the way we interpret these stories, the way we absorb social media and the way we absorb internet-style news feeds, is that it's not the news. It's not what people think. Really, there is just a massive lack of context with online news. Like, it really needs to be disseminated in a slower, more careful way of like, who's actually saying this? What exactly is the actual size of any particular outcry? Just the way that the headlines of the day are just like, here's the headline, here's today's, here's tomorrow's, here's next week's. And it's just all a bunch of random ass fucking nonsense. And is any of it the real news? Is any of it the real opinions of anybody? Like, yeah, you can't take a small group of wags and treat them like their fucking opinion matters, basically. I don't know. I definitely don't think our generation is going to be looked back on fondly. Granted, we're the first ones who've had to deal with a globe-spanning social media method of communication, but we're so bad at it. We don't know how to exist within this world. We don't know how to disseminate this information. We don't know how to talk to each other. We don't know anything. We're such fucking idiots. The example I always think of is imagine if they had Twitter in the 1950s. Just imagine all the dumb shit you could scroll through and just see all this horrible nonsense that they would have said. But that's us. That's us, man. That's what the future's going to think about us. They're going to come back and look at our shit and be like, these people were the biggest fucking morons in the world. They didn't deserve the technology they had. They're just fools. It's a pretty broad topic for a tiny, silly little E3 video, promotional video for a video game that everyone has already forgotten, but hey, whatever. I'm on the beach. If I can't rant here, where can I rant? Gender. Let's see how I handled this. Gender roles are obviously a touchy subject, particularly on the internet. But I do like that they are. Oh yeah. You know what? I don't need to read this part. Whatever. It's in the book if you want to go find it. It's basically about this thing with DOA beach volleyball, whatever, that the game was not released in North America because they considered it a hostile environment. And in this case, I think that's kind of great. I do love that because, I'm all about, if you want to be a weird pervert, I'm with you, man. I'm there. I've fucking wasted way too much of my life looking up dumb internet porn. I bought BMX XXX on the GameCube because I didn't want to support the censorship of boobs in games on the PlayStation 2. I'm not particularly proud of that, but that's where I was at in my early 20s. That's who I was. But the DOA volleyball games are so creepy, particularly that character Mary Rose, where they're like, oh yeah, don't worry, Mary Rose she's 18 for sure. It's like, no, she's not. She's 13. It's so creepy. And again, if you want to make that game, go ahead. You want to buy that game, go ahead. Just order it. Go on eBay and order it. What I like about that game not being released in North America in an official way is that it's not in every store. And I think that's a chip on my shoulder because I used to work in a comic shop in the late 90s and early 2000s. And I hated how, here's the comic store, here's fucking the land where you can get Chester Brown comics and you can get fucking Strangers in Paradise, and you can get Mouse, and you can get Sandman, and you can get all this great shit. But there's always posters of half-naked chicks everywhere. You got the fucking Image Comics is actually pretty respectable now, but it wasn't back then. You get that whole view of things, that side of things. And it was such a bummer whenever somebody would bring their girlfriend or their wife into the comic shop, and I could be like, hey, look at this, look at Strangers in Paradise, look how cool this is. But it's so much harder to make this fucking medium seem legitimate when it's just surrounded by half-naked, ridiculous cartoon babes everywhere. I hated that was such an ingrained part of comic books that I had to try to explain that away. And I feel the same way about video games. It's you shouldn't have to go into every GameStop or every fucking Walmart or every whatever in the fucking world and just have to pretend that Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball 3 isn't there. You know? You shouldn't have to be like, hey mom, can I get this game? Just ignore that game though. Don't look at that game with the functionally nude 13-year-old girl in it. Please just pretend that's not there. Trust me, this is a legitimate fucking medium. This is a legitimate pastime. I thought that was so awesome. That hey, if you want to put videos of Extreme Beach Volleyball on YouTube and look at the hot-ass babes from this game, go ahead. But that shouldn't be part of what represents this medium. That shouldn't be in the public eye. That shouldn't be on the shelf. It just shouldn't. Fuck you, Japan. You can't put a 13-year-old in a game and just say she's 18. Fuck you. You know, this should be, what did they call it? a hostile environment. Like, this should be a hostile environment for that. I'm proud that North America is a hostile environment to that fucking nonsense. That's niche jerk-off nonsense. You know? If you want to jerk off to that game, please feel free. Go order a copy. Have a great time. But yeah, that shouldn't be on the shelves. That shouldn't be part of here's what video games are. All right, where were we? Societal collapse. Back to the apocalypse. Joel and Ellie pass a body that's been strung up with a warning message scrawled next to it. That got me to thinking, would the post-apocalypse world really be this bad? In our current world, assault and law-breaking are almost statistically insignificant. I can only speak for the first world, but around here, most people are going to make it to a ripe old age without losing even a single limb. If human civilization were a superhero movie, the good guys have won. The bad guys are only making tiny dents in the juggernaut of stability that has been built. The more dramatic and probably high school-aged among us may argue that the human race is a force of great evil. But the truth is that bad people are not the true representatives of humanity. They're only a small aberration. The villains are not the ones setting the pace for the human race. So, things are pretty stable right now. But I can't say that that's how things are fundamentally. Ultimately, human beings are just animals. If we're pitted against enough pressure, our biological needs and fear of death will probably win out over our higher values. I've heard it said that society would collapse after only 48 hours without food, that we're only 48 hours away from anarchy at any given time, which is a pretty spooky thought. I feel like that number is probably exaggerated, but after 20 years of pressure, collapse would certainly ensue. Right now, a life of crime is a tough thing. You're at a huge disadvantage as all of our societal systems are primed and ready to stamp out your bullshit. But after a certain point, the tables would turn. After long enough, maybe the villains would become the representatives of humanity. The bad guys would be the ones setting the pace, and the good people would be the ones barely making a dent. Kids would be raised with a violent set of values, and the etch-a-sketch of society would get shaken, then redrawn into something else. What the fuck am I even talking about? Is anyone following this shit? I was thinking that very thing. And even this, whatever this rambling, I don't quite know what point I was trying to get to there, but I don't know that any of that really holds up. I read this book last year called Tribe by Sebastian... Sebastian Junger? And if you don't want to read the whole book, he made an appearance on Joe Rogan's podcast that kind of sums up the ideas, but it's like, it really does kind of point out how more primitive societies... or stress times, they don't actually fracture society. That when you think everybody would just be out for themselves and everything's going to fall apart, that the exact opposite happens. That, during the bombings of London or during places like Middle Eastern conflicts and stuff, just how much more tight-knit people are, to the point that after a conflict is over, sometimes people miss it, They think back fondly on those more dangerous days because everybody had a reason to buddy up and come together and help each other out. And so even that idea that I don't think I explained very well, I don't know what I was rambling about there, but about, the bad guys setting the pace rather than the good guys for how society is going to work. The truth is that just doesn't happen, The good side of people really is what people are. It just is. It doesn't matter what your philosophical thoughts are or your fucking internalized misanthropy or whatever. People come together. People are a tribe. People look after each other. That's what they do. The people that fuck with each other, that are bad, that are greedy, that don't look after each other, they really are the aberration. They're the tiny percentage that doesn't really add up to shit. It's not coincidence that we got where we are, that we have this big mass society that has tamed the world, because this is what we do. We work together. That's just how it is. And like, if you're an angry fucking 16-year-old, you probably, in a weird way, like, don't even want to believe it. Like, no, the human race sucks. People suck. Fuck that. That's not true. We're terrible. We're the worst. We ruin each other. We ruin the earth. We ruin everything. But we don't. We just don't. That's not how we are. Now let's segue to the very natural next point of comics. Joel finds a comic book in an abandoned vehicle. "Hey, Ellie," he says, "found one of them comic books you've been reading." Is my Joel voice getting... It's not getting better, is it? "Oh, cool," she replies, and her tone could be interpreted as being disinterested. Maybe her mind is still plunged deep into ponderings about the fall of civilization. Or maybe Joel's daddening has already begun. He really only knows one thing about Ellie, that she likes comic books. So he's leaning on that one thing as a half-assed way to connect with her. Chatter. It really astounds me how many ways the gameplay and narrative of The Last of Us successfully intertwine. There are so many connections that some of them have to be happy accidents. For example, Joel's prickly personality helps explain his intermittent dialogue. Convincing in-game dialogue has long been a problem for video games. As soon as CD-ROMs allowed for recorded dialogue, we started being treated to a procession of stilted, stiff, awkward weirdos. In theory, in-game dialogue was a move toward realism. In actuality, nothing breaks the illusion of immersion as quickly as a character firing off a limited set of quips at a peculiar time, then falling mysteriously silent. With Joel, occasional small bursts of dialogue make sense. He's a taciturn Texan, and his brains may be a bit scrambled to boot. There is not going to be a lot of chatter with him. More and more, Joel seems like the perfect action game character. Yes, he's a psycho, but other game characters go on crazed shooting sprees without being psychos. Joel really is about the only honest representation of the kind of character who would exist in an action game. So don't hate the playa. Chair. And that is a perfect example of when I don't know how to end a segment, so I just say a combination of wrestling catchphrases. That was a little Booker T mixed with JTG for you there. 3 little hunters. Joel and Ellie hear some hunters and take cover. There are 3 of them, strolling casually along, talking among themselves. It's like a weird kid's book. I take my time, trying to decide how I should kill them. But while I'm hiding out, the hunters... Man, it's tough. That's the one. Goddamn, the Canadian accent, the out thing, out and about. It's really tough. I mean, a lot of people just aren't even aware of their own accent. I can hear it, but I don't quite know how to fix it. It's a weird feeling. It's a small affectation, you know. It's not like a German person trying to say squirrel or something, but yeah, I can't quite get past it. Anyway, but while I'm hiding out, the hunters decide they're tired of waiting for their friends, so they head onward. I didn't know that could happen. Cool. There's a sign scrawled on the wall demanding that the military distribute more rations. Ellie mentions that there were never ration shortages in Boston, and Joel says there definitely were. That suggests that the central area of the Boston QZ was pretty well off. Ellie and the other army brats were well protected enough that they managed to never experience a shortage. So good on ya, crazed military. It is funny that the more I think about this game, like the more opposed I am to the Fireflies and the more I side with the military. My fucking rebellious attitude when push comes to shove, it turns out is the opposite. In an apocalypse situation, it's like, hey rebels, fuck you. Pay attention to the people with a plan, you assholes. Man, I'm just looking at these these waves washing up on the beach allow me to get philosophical again. But it's funny to see all of these shells, just these dead clams. And it's like, it's like a cruelty in a way to being conscious, is that we're the only animals that know we're gonna die. So you could look at that in a bad way of like, oh man, how brutal that we have to face the ultimate pointlessness of our existence, and we have to know that we're gonna die. But man, that's way better. I'm way more glad to be aware that I'm gonna die than this. Like, how weird is that? You're just like a little clam, you got a little shell, you do whatever you do to spawn off some more clams, and then you just die, and now here you are washed up on the beach, and just like, what the fuck was that? I was just around for a little while and I did some shit and now I'm dead? What the fuck was that all about? I think it's much neater that even if the only ultimate conclusion we can come to is that it was weird and didn't mean shit and didn't appear to have any purpose, at least we know that much, I think that's better. Here I am comparing the human experience to the clam experience. You know what? You should probably bail out now. Why are you still listening to this? I don't know if I would be. I don't know. I guess I would be. I mean, I wrote it. The bookstore encounter. The next big battle is in a 2-story bookstore with an open second floor. On my first playthrough, this fight was a total clusterfuck. I ended up scamming a win by hiding outside a window near the back stairs and killing guys one at a time as they leapt through. It was really cheap and I wasn't proud of it. But that's how a first playthrough goes. Everything base and pathetic in your nature comes to the surface as you look for any way you can find to scrounge out a victory. Exploiting systems. I always thought one of the more interesting aspects of a lifetime spent playing video games is that we game players have a ton of experience with identifying the limits of a system and then breaking those systems. Say you're playing Fallout New Vegas and you get stuck because that game is a glitchy fuckfest. But then you use your knowledge of glitchy pieces of shit to glitch yourself past that roadblock and back onto the proper course. With enough video game experience, that kind of journey outside the boundaries becomes not a happy accident, but something you're reasonably certain you can accomplish. At that point, you're not even playing the actual game anymore. You're playing a metagame on top of a metagame, and that is some crazy shit. I'm not sure what practical use that experience carries, but surely it has some application in real life. When I figure out how to hack Wall Street through glitch theory, I'll write an update to this segment. 6 months from now, tops. So, I mean, I don't have any solid examples of how video games help see through the little silly rules of life, but there's little times. Like, there's this chain of drugstores in Canada called Shoppers Drug Mart, and I got talked into getting their dumb shoppers card once. And it was so easy, just based on like MMOs and basic role-playing game leveling, to look at the points you get from this stupid card. It's like when you buy something, you get X number of points, and when you get a certain number of points, you redeem that in for rebates or whatever. And just looking at it, it's so immediately obvious that it's like, dude, this is not worth it. This is absurd. This leveling system is not worth my time. And additionally, it just adds that little thought in your head all the time of like, well, I gotta go buy some shit. I guess I should go to Shoppers Drug Mart, just because I got the stupid card. I might as well get the points. And I mean, a lot of people go in for those kinds of things, those little point cards and shit. And it's just like radically not worth it. And it really does work for them, because I think it really does draw people in of like, well, I'm going to go where I got the card because I got to get the points. But the points aren't worth shit. They aren't worth dick. You're just like enslaving yourself in this little subtle way to this one store for no fucking reason, for like no benefit. Whereas on the other hand, my friend Mike, who is also a lifelong video game player, he got one of the like Scotiabank cards for Scotiabank theaters here in Canada, and he immediately deduced that if you get this one combo that's, you know, like the 2-person combo, like the candy and the fucking popcorn and the 2 drinks for 2 people, it's like a crazy bad deal, you know? It's like $20 for this thing. But you get enough points buying that you can go to one of the VIP movies. We have these like VIP theaters that's like a step above 3D, a step above IMAX. VIP is crazy expensive. It's like $25 for a ticket. And, you know, they serve you beer and just like you have your own fancy seat, and it's like ridiculous. But he figured out that if he just buys this combo for him and his girlfriend, they get the ticket price for free. And that totally does work. It's like, yay, video games in action, you know, like we can easily see these patterns. I'm not saying that's the greatest trick of all time. I'm just saying it is, you know, like it's the min-maxing. That's what it is. It's like, well, this is the one thing that is actually beneficial. And there was something else just the other day. What was it that I was doing that I felt that way about? Oh, casinos. I went to a casino for my friend Vince's birthday. And man, it's just like, I did some research after to see if slot machines really are as ludicrous as I thought they were, but it was so easy to apply video game logic and video game experience to this thing, and it's like, dude, this is literally just random, and you just lose. Of course you lose. Like, everybody knows that, but they keep doing it, you know? They keep hoping against hope they're gonna be the guy that wins. And if you have a video game background, it's just way easier to recognize that you're like, if this was a video game, I wouldn't do this. I would not partake in this system because this is absurd. I'm not getting anything out of this. I'm just getting fucked, you know? For little stuff like that, I do feel like just crunching the numbers of basic everyday life, video games they're a good thing to have in your back pocket because it's just so ingrained in us. It's so inborn. We've spent our whole lives dealing with RPG systems and levels and numbers. Maybe other people are applying this to, you know, stock markets and mortgages and useful things. For me, it's just Shoppers Drug Mart cards and fucking slot machines. But it's so easy to see through it, like to just, apply it to a video game background and be like, dude, fuck you. You're gonna try to fleece me with this? You gotta try harder than this. If this was a video game, I would not buy you. I would not be playing this game. How that all relates to loot boxes and literal gambling within video games, I mean, that's a whole different discussion. So let's just stop discussing it for now, shall we? Bookstore punch-up. As I got better at The Last of Us, this bookstore fight became one of my favorite sections. It's really different and unique each time, and I eventually learned that it's also totally optional. It's a huge, elaborate fight, but you can just cruise right past it. Crazy. I was intending to bravely murder all these fine young men, but now I don't know. That last fight was ridiculously punishing, and if this fight gives me that same kind of trouble, I might tap out. Besides, there ain't no shame in sneaking. Any sneaker'll tell you that. Sure wish I had a bottle or two to lure enemies away. Bottles and bricks really are the weapons that I miss most of all. I take out one guy on the bottom floor, then creep upstairs and slowly take out the few people up there. At that point, if I want to skip the fight, I'm home free. Should I double back and find the people I haven't killed? That'd be madness. So I just keep moving. I've never actually gone through that encounter being so unseen. That was super smooth. Nice. Stairs. As a quick aside, the bookstore fight is where I first learned that it's never a good idea to fight on stairs. The Last of Us does not handle stairs very well. All kinds of weird clipping and odd attacks can happen. Sometimes the glitchiness works in your favor, but it's better to stay on flat ground where things are more predictable. In this case, glitches are not your friend. And that's one to grow on. Selective realism, aka the Grand Theft Auto 4 effect. I know you can't question game logic too much without becoming a really annoying guy, but once Joel realizes that bottles are his ultimate weapon, you'd think he could cram a few into his backpack. Maybe leave that homemade flamethrower behind and just bring an empty six-pack instead. It reminds me of the health system in Grand Theft Auto 4. All Nico needed to make everything all right was a hot dog. A single hot dog meant life or death to him. So half the game saw me running around, trying to find a hot dog vendor. But if you drove too close to a hot dog stand, the vendor would get scared and run off. And Nico would not steal a hot dog because I don't know why. He's a massively stupid man, I guess. Sometimes the hot dog vendor would just plain not be there. Because that's, quote-unquote, realistic. In the couple of years I spent in New York, I never once saw an unlocked, unmanned hot dog cart. Maybe the day Rockstar was doing New York Recon was also the one day that a hot dog guy was on the payphone around the corner, fighting desperately for custody of his kids. Or maybe they just like making their games less fun for no goddamn reason. Either way, that kind of realism over fun nonsense is in a nutshell why Grand Theft Auto 4 sucked so bad. Go back and try to play that game. It is a non-stop barrage of annoying anti-player bullshit. I was once running from the Liberty City PD and made my way into a subway. There, I had to wait 4 minutes for the next scheduled subway to arrive. It really took the pizzazz out of that chase. Why couldn't the game fudge the schedule so that a subway arrived just in time to whisk me away? Was Rockstar worried about ruining the simulation for the other simulated people? I'm the only one who's real. If it's not a critical detail, then make things fun for me. Man, hook me up with some of that gamey-ass Sleeping Dogs any day. That's a bit of a... Man, just for a little bit of a slightly outdated divergence. I mean, Grand Theft Auto 5 did a lot to bring back the sense of fun to Grand Theft Auto games, but I remember just because I loved GTA 3 and San Andreas so much, I still think they're better than Vice City. You can fight me if you want, but Vice City had a great aesthetic, but it's just flat. It's a very boring game. But then, yeah, GTA 4, oh man, it took a long time for me to realize how bad that game is, but it's just no fun. Like, all of that fun of fucking around in San Andreas, absolutely gone in 4. So I remember when Sleeping Dogs came out, I was like, oh, there's that feeling, there's that fun. Like, they brought back the fun, big time. And even though the scope of Sleeping Dogs is much, much smaller than GTA 5, I still like Sleeping Dogs better. Like, I like the characters better, I like the storyline better, I like the vibe better. The world of GTA 5 is amazing. Like, just to watch the city happen is awesome. But as for a game, to just listen to a cool soundtrack and do cool shit, man, Sleeping Dogs, it is so cool. It's such a bummer they never got to make a sequel. Like, man, what a good game. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that if Nico had a backpack full of hot dogs, his life would have gone a lot smoother. Even just cramming a raw dog into each pocket would have improved his day immensely. Another option would be to lodge one dog partway down his throat and expertly swallow it at the appropriate time. Anything to avoid cruising the city, bleeding to death, desperately trying not to scare away the guy selling hot dogs. I bet those moments made all real-life thugs think, wow, this is exactly like my life. Post-bookstore. You know, I'm sure there's like very few audiobooks where each chapter title is just proclaimed into the heavens. But maybe there should be more. After the bookstore fight, there's a shiv door with an X painted on it. It was ages before I even noticed that door. This time I don't have any shivs because I don't have anything. So let's hop inside that door through the magic of the Last of Us wiki. Inside is a note written by a mother. Her son died, so now mom is retaliating by taking up arms to fuck some shit up. After reading the note, Joel says to himself, "Well, with that kind of thinking, no one wins." Yeah, okay, sure, Joel. Lay that eye for an eye wisdom on us. Ol' level-headed Joel. But I guess everyone thinks they're the sensible one, even if they're a psycho. Probably especially if they're a psycho. Characterization in video games. The overall lore of the Pittsburgh section doesn't gel as well for me as the rest of the game does. There are a lot of small details that don't fully add up. For example, does this shiv door note really seem like it was written by a mother? Maybe, but maybe not. It's not badly done, it's just not convincing enough for me to immediately buy in. Instead, it gets me wondering about whether it really makes sense, and once I have that thought enough times, the whole fiction of the area starts to gradually unravel. One of the greatest signs that Steve Gaynor is an amazing writer is his ability in Gone Home to emulate different types of writing. That game has good writing and bad writing and kids writing. It even has bad writing that sounds like it might be fun to read, and it's all very deliberate. I wonder why I didn't write a book about Gone Home. Surely that book would be finished by now. This one's not even half done. Well, live and learn. Apparently, the trophy for unlocking all the shiv doors is called Master of Unlocking. Shitty voice acting, as expressed through the medium of Resident Evil 1. When the first Resident Evil came out, it was a sweet game. It was like Alone in the Dark, but with better graphics. When those dogs jumped through the window, my friend Jay threw the fucking controller. That shit was scary, man. The writing and acting in Resident Evil was insanely dogshit, but that made me love the game even more. "Jill, here's a lockpick. It might come in handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you." That stuff was awesome, a hilarious send-up of old shitty horror movies. In 1996, the term meta was rarely in use. Resident Evil was miles ahead of the curve in the ironic self-awareness department. I loved it. But there was the possibility that it wasn't clever at all. It might have just been a really poor job done by some audio directors at Capcom who didn't realize how awful a job they had done. So I waited with bated breath, whatever that means, to see how Resident Evil 2 would handle its dialogue. Resident Evil 2 was a pretty great game, but the audio had been upgraded. It was only blandly terrible, the same way that every video game was terrible. It wasn't super amazing terrible like the original. Man, that was a downer. I still love Resident Evil's dialogue for how awesomely it sucks, but it's sad to know that it wasn't supposed to be that way. They thought it was totally rad when Barry proclaimed, "Stay away from the door, Jill. I'm gonna kick this door down." In reality, they were just wildly inept. Pittsburgh lore. I'm trying to piece together the overall Pittsburgh story, and it seems a little hard to follow. I guess the Fireflies helped destabilize the military. Then an independent group of rebelling civilians turned against both the military and the Fireflies, becoming the hunters that we're now fighting. I guess it's not really that complicated, but it never feels quite clear while I'm playing. When asked if there was anything he wished he had done differently in The Last of Us, I heard Bruce Straley say that he might have considered including a head of the hunters type character during this section. It's a bit of a catch-22. Having a distinct leader might give the Pittsburgh enemies a more easily digestible story, but it also might seem less realistic for Joel to run afoul of some charismatic, ever-present evil dude. Sometimes there ain't no clear answer. Life, man. Life. Aiming for the bridge. There's a sign saying which way to turn to get to the bridge, with the name of the bridge deliberately crossed out in red paint. I wonder if a tourist did that to let people know that the bridge is destroyed. Not that Joel would have listened. The more I think about that bus from the initial Pittsburgh ambush, the more I think Joel is double psycho. Well, no way around this bus. We'll have to head deeper into the city. We could go under it, or over it, or through it. There are like 6 ways past this bus. Come follow me through this garage, Ellie. Past all these corpses. We gotta go deeper. We gotta choke people with our hands. We got no other choice. Maybe Ellie is just a figment of Joel's imagination. Maybe she went back up to the highway and just left him muttering to himself. Old flags. There are a lot of old American flags in The Last of Us, but the ones in Pittsburgh look way worse than the rest. They're all fucked up. I grew up in Canada, and I always thought America seemed pretty cool. Then I moved to New York City for a couple of years, and I took a bunch of trips to other nearby cities, and no offense, America, but your shit is coming apart at the seams. It is a crazy goddamn country full of crazy goddamn people. I really didn't like the feeling of being there. So actually, feel free to take offense, because what I just said is pretty offensive. But there's something about a dirty American flag that still seems pretty cool. I felt the same way when I saw the ragged flags in Red Dead Redemption. A trampled flag gives one the feeling of the fictional America. The storybook America. The one that's tough and brave and righteous. That place is a total goddamn lie, but sure is a nice story. So there's a little more cultural offense for no fucking reason. Talking with Ellie. The optional conversation system, where a triangle icon appears over Ellie's head, is a bit weird. I kept missing out on it. On my first playthrough, I didn't hear any of Ellie's jokes. I heard her say something about needing to lighten the mood, but I was too busy foraging to notice her talking prompt. The optional conversation in this section is particularly egregious. You need to backtrack a few meters, go stand near an advertisement, wait for Ellie to comment on it, then wait for the icon to appear over her head. That is a lot more standing still and deliberately watching Ellie than I ever generally do. There are a fair few of the optional dialogues that I only found after looking up a list online. In this game, I'd like to hear the dialogue. It would be okay with me if it were a little less hidden. Introducing the Super Truck. I'm not sure what the actual name is for this vehicle that drives around Pittsburgh. I mean, it's surely not the Super Truck. But I generally refer to it as the Super Truck. So hopefully you find that charming and not frustratingly inaccurate. Joel swims over to grab a pallet, and the Super Truck drives ominously by. Da-da, da-da. Which leads me to think of Uncharted 2 in Kamikaze Tank. Remember the tank that chases you in Uncharted 2? I love how in Uncharted games, every edge case will happen. Every bridge will break, every handhold will come loose. You always expect it, but it's still always awesome. The tank might be my favorite example. It drives partially over the lip of a cliff just to freak you out. It's not going to catch you that way. Some guy driving was just like, "Hey, watch this. I'm going to make Nathan Drake shit his goddamn pants." Then he gunned it for a cliff, stopping 1 inch away from his own total doom. I'm sure everyone else in the tank shit their pants too. People who are only standing around watching shit their pants. When somebody radioed back to headquarters to report about how the tank was teetering over the edge of the abyss just to surprise one guy, the officer in charge shit his pants. Whoever was driving that tank, he is a true prankster hero. Coffee shop. Our apocalypse pals head into an old coffee shop, and I like Joel's little run about how he misses coffee. That actually happens in the hotel across the street, but close enough. Somehow it never occurred to me that after an apocalypse, coffee would be gone. That would fucking suck. Maybe Joel managed to smuggle in some instant coffee once in a while. A nice tin of Folgers crystals. But real coffee is long gone. And that's pretty sad, man. Ellie asks Joel, "Did you go to coffee shops a lot?" "I did. All the time." "And what would you get?" Just coffee." Joel. So plain. Those were the days. Before he knew the frothy tang of violence. The frothy tang of blood. He was just having a coffee. I'm sort of surprised that Ellie has enough awareness of coffee shop culture to know that they served more than just regular coffee. It's like coffee shops have passed into legend. These shops, which were sprinkled all over and which served all of these fancy drinks. The romantic old coffee world. Memento mori. I really like apocalypse stories as a way to remind me to really appreciate my life. The fact that I can go to a coffee shop, listen to music, and read a book while I drink a fancy-ass coffee, that's fucking amazing. I get a similar feeling from looking at old photographs. Obviously, life in the past wasn't all bad, and some aspects of it were pretty amazing. But there was also a lot of horrible shit. And being reminded of that makes it so much easier to put the luckiness of my present life into perspective. I once saw a picture of a little girl at an orphanage, praying at her bed, under a sign that said, "Jesus first, others second, you last." She was deeply under the thumb of other people, and I felt really bad for her. My life couldn't be more different than that. I can pursue literally whatever I'm interested in. I'm writing an ebook about The Last of Us, for God's sake. My job is to play a video game with new rules of my own devising and then to write about it. It's like a miracle life. This kind of existence would be completely unfathomable to that kid. I should be deliriously happy every single day. But everything is relative. It's easy to lose sight of how good things are. 10 minutes from now, I'll probably forget again. So that's why I like depressing art, or reminders about depressing moments in time. They help me remember to be appreciative of what I've got. Test, test, test. Ho, no. This isn't gonna work. Listen to how echoey this is. What if I poke my head out a little bit? Is that better? Test, test, hello? Ooh. I don't love this. Okay, so here's the deal. No, I really don't like this. This sound quality sucks. All right, well, here's the outtake of here's how. I was trying so hard to get in. I got to get a certain number of pages of this thing read every day, or I'm not going to make it in time before I fly away from British Columbia and I'm not on this cool beach anymore. But today it's raining. I thought maybe I could just sit in this water pipe with the hollowed out bottom, with the rusted out bottom, to stay out of the rain and record my pages in here, but no dice. I mean, obviously you can hear the water behind me, but I thought, maybe that'll be like it's just like a little fountain, that's fine. But this echo is real bad. It sounds terrible. So you know what, I'll just hunker down in here Maybe I'll just watch a little TV on my phone or something. See if this day clears up. There seem to be some holes in these clouds. These are some patchy clouds, so maybe I'll still get my time in. So there's a little bonus bit of sitting in the pipe. That's sort of apocalypsy, right? Last man on Earth type of shit. Except for that airplane that just went by. All right. Wish me better luck later in the day.